Last night, viewers watched in shock as Brad Pitt was escorted off the Jimmy Kimmel's show following an explosive argument. What started as a simple movie promotion turned into a public meltdown when Kimmel crossed the line with deeply personal attacks, prompting Pitt to defend himself before walking off stage with his dignity intact. The studio lights were extra bright last night on the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live. As Hollywood superstar Brad Pitt walked onto the stage with his usual confident smile, the audience erupted in cheers and applause as the actor waved and took his seat across from Jimmy. Brad was there to talk about his new Formula One racing movie, and everyone was excited to hear about it. "Welcome back to the show, Brad," Jimmy said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're looking well for a man your age." Brad laughed and nodded politely. "Thanks, Jimmy. Great to be here again. I'm really excited to talk about this new F1 project. We filmed at actual Grand Prix events and—" Yeah, the racing movie," Jimmy interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "But first, let's talk about something more interesting. You've been in the news a lot lately, and not for your acting." The audience grew quiet as they sensed the shift in tone. Brad's smile faded slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I'm not sure what you mean, Jimmy. I've been focused on this film for the past year. It's been an amazing experience working with—" "Come on, Brad," Jimmy cut in again, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "Everyone knows about your family drama, your ex-wife, your kids. Some of them don't even want to use your last name anymore, right? Must be tough knowing your own children are trying to distance themselves from you." A nervous murmur spread through the audience. This wasn't the usual playful banter people expected from Jimmy Kimmel. Brad's face tensed, but he took a deep breath before responding. "Jimmy, I came here to talk about the movie. I don't discuss my children publicly. They deserve their privacy." "Privacy?" "That's rich coming from someone who's lived his entire life in the spotlight," Jimmy pushed. "You parade around with different girlfriends half your age while your family falls apart. Don't you think that's a bit pathetic?" The audience gasped. This wasn't just crossing a line. Jimmy had leaped over it. The show's producer could be seen frantically signaling from off stage, but Jimmy ignored them. Brad sat up straighter in his chair. "I think we should get back to discussing the film. As I was saying, we worked closely with actual F1 teams to make sure—" "The film, right?" Jimmy said with an exaggerated eye roll. "Let's be honest, Brad. When was the last time you actually made a good movie? You're just coasting on your looks, which, let's face it, aren't what they used to be." Brad's jaw tightened. The camera caught a glimpse of genuine hurt flash across his face before he regained control. The audience was now completely silent, watching the uncomfortable exchange with growing unease. "That's an interesting take," Brad replied coolly. "But I stand by my work. This new film represents years of effort from hundreds of talented people, and I'm proud to be part of it." "Proud? Is that what you tell yourself?" Jimmy leaned forward. "Like you told yourself you were a good father? I heard you haven't spoken to some of your kids in years. Must be tough knowing they preferred your ex-wife." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Brad's hand, resting on the armrest, clenched into a fist. For a moment it looked like he might lose his temper, but instead, he took another deep breath. "Look, Jimmy," Brad said in a controlled voice. "I understand that controversy gets ratings, but there's a difference between a friendly joke and deliberately trying to hurt someone. What exactly are you hoping to achieve here?" The audience applauded Brad's response, clearly siding with him. This seemed to irritate Jimmy even more. "Oh, now you're the victim," Jimmy scoffed. "Classic Hollywood. You mess up your life and then act surprised when someone calls you out on it. Your box office numbers have been dropping for years, just like your reputation. Now you're doing a racing movie? Trying to seem cool and relevant again?" Brad shook his head in disbelief. "I've been in this business for over 30 years, Jimmy. I've had ups and downs like anyone else, but I've always tried to treat people with respect, including talk show hosts who might be having a bad day." The audience cheered at Brad's subtle comeback. Jimmy's face reddened as he realized he was losing control of the situation and the audience. Respect? Is that what you call it? Jimmy snapped. Let's talk about respect. How respectful was it when you left? That's enough, Brad interrupted firmly. I came here in good faith to talk about a project I'm passionate about. Instead, you've spent the last 5 minutes trying to provoke me with personal attacks. That's not entertainment, Jimmy. It's just mean. More applause erupted from the audience. Brad's calm but firm response was winning people over, and Jimmy knew it. The host's smile had completely disappeared now, replaced by a look of frustration. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be in the public eye, Jimmy shot back. The audience wants the real story, not your sanitized PR version. The audience deserves better than this, Brad replied, looking directly at the camera. They tuned in for an interview, not a character assassination. And frankly, so did I. The tension between the two men was now palpable. The show's producer was waving frantically from the sidelines, making a cutting motion across his throat. A clear signal to go to commercial break. But Jimmy wasn't finished. You know what your problem is, Brad? Jimmy said, his voice rising. You think you're better than everyone else. You think that charm and good looks excuse everything. But people see through it now. Your act is getting old, just like you. A collective gasp went through the studio. Brad stared at Jimmy, disappointment evident in his expression. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The silence was deafening. Then, with deliberate movements, Brad removed his microphone and placed it on the small table beside him. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and looked at Jimmy one last time. I've been in this business long enough to know when someone is trying to build themselves up by tearing others down, he said quietly. I'm sorry you felt the need to do that tonight, Jimmy. I truly am. The audience was completely still as Brad turned and walked toward the exit. Jimmy, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, called after him. Brad, come on. Don't be so sensitive. It's just TV. But Brad Pitt continued walking. Just before he reached the backstage area, he paused and turned to address the audience directly. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm sorry you didn't get to hear about the movie. It's a story about perseverance, teamwork, and respect, values that matter now more than ever. With that parting comment, Brad disappeared backstage, leaving Jimmy alone in the spotlight with a stunned audience and a show that was quickly becoming a PR disaster. As the cameras continued to roll, capturing Jimmy's increasingly panicked expression, everyone was wondering what would happen next. For a few seconds, Jimmy sat frozen in his chair, the smile on his face more like a grimace. The audience's murmurs grew louder, with some people even standing up and booing. Jimmy raised his hands, trying to calm the situation. Folks, come on now, Jimmy said, attempting to laugh it off. That's showbiz for you. Sometimes conversations get a little heated. We'll be right back after this break. But the damage was done. As the show cut to commercial, chaos erupted in the studio. The producer rushed onto the stage, his face red with anger. What the heck was that? He shouted at Jimmy, forgetting that some audience members could still hear them. Have you lost your mind? That's Brad Pitt. You can't talk to him like that. Jimmy stood up, throwing his note cards onto the desk. He was being boring. I was just trying to spice things up a bit. The audience wants drama. Look around, Jimmy, the producer hissed, gesturing to the audience. Does this look like they're enjoying the show? Many audience members were on their phones, no doubt sharing what they had just witnessed on social media. Others were talking among themselves, shaking their heads in disapproval. A few were heading for the exits, not wanting to stick around for the rest of the show. Meanwhile, backstage was even more frantic. Brad's publicist was livid, pacing back and forth and yelling into her phone. Brad himself stood quietly near the exit, his expression calm but determined. Brad, I am so sorry, a young production assistant said, rushing up to him with a bottle of water. I don't know what got into Jimmy tonight. Brad accepted the water with a small smile. It's not your fault. Some people just forget what it means to treat others with respect. The show's executive producer hurried over, looking like he might faint. Mr. Pitt, please accept our deepest apologies. This is not how we do things here. If you'll just come back out, I'm sure we can salvage the interview. Jimmy will apologize on air. Brad shook his head. I think it's best if I leave. Tonight wasn't about promoting a movie. It was about humiliation for ratings, and I won't be part of that. As this was happening, the commercial break was ending. The director was frantically signaling to Jimmy, who was still arguing with the producer. We're back in 5, 4, 3, 2. The on-air sign lit up, and Jimmy found himself back on camera, alone at his desk with no guest. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie nervously. Welcome back, everyone, he said, his voice slightly shaky. Unfortunately, it seems Brad Pitt had to leave early. These Hollywood types, always in a rush, am I right? His joke fell flat. The audience remained silent, many of them glaring at him with open disapproval. So, let's move on to our next segment, Jimmy continued, sweat now visible on his forehead. Suddenly, a voice called out from the audience. You owe him an apology. Jimmy squinted into the bright lights, trying to see who had spoken. Excuse me? You were way out of line, another audience member shouted. That was awful. More voices joined in, the audience turning against the host in a way that had never happened before on the show. Jimmy raised his hands, trying to regain control. Folks, please, let's all calm down. This is a comedy show. We push boundaries sometimes. That wasn't comedy, someone yelled. That was bullying. Backstage, the chaos continued to unfold. Brad's publicist was on the phone with the network executives, demanding a public apology. The show's producers were huddled together, trying to figure out how to handle the disaster that was unfolding live on national television. Brad himself was preparing to leave the building when he heard a commotion from the studio. He paused, listening to the audience defending him against Jimmy's attacks. One of the cameramen approached Brad, looking nervous. Sir, I know you're about to leave, and I don't blame you, he said quietly. But the audience is turning on Jimmy. They're calling him out for how he treated you. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. Brad considered this for a moment, then shook his head. It's not about taking sides. It's about basic human decency. I hope Jimmy learned something from this, but I don't need to stick around to see it happen. Back on stage, Jimmy was losing control of the situation entirely. The audience continued to voice their disapproval, with some people actually walking out mid-show. The director was frantically signaling to cut to another commercial break. Look, everyone, I think we're all getting a little carried away here, Jimmy said, desperately trying to salvage the situation. It was just some friendly banter that went a bit too far. I'm sure Brad wasn't actually offended. As if on cue, one of the production assistants rushed onto the stage and whispered something in Jimmy's ear. The color drained from his face. Well, it seems that Brad Pitt has, officially left the building, Jimmy announced, his forced smile faltering. And his publicist has informed us that he won't be returning to the show. Ever. The audience erupted again, this time with even more people standing up and heading for the exits. It was unprecedented. A live studio audience abandoning a taping, in progress. Jimmy looked around desperately, seeing the disapproval on everyone's faces. Even his own staff looked disappointed in him. The show was falling apart right before his eyes. We're going to take a quick break, Jimmy said weakly. And when we come back, we'll figure something out. As the show cut to commercial again, Jimmy slumped in his chair, the reality of what had just happened finally sinking in. He had crossed a line and might have just destroyed his own reputation in the process. Outside the studio, Brad was walking to his car when he noticed a group of fans gathered near the exit. He hesitated, not wanting to deal with more drama, but they had clearly been waiting for him. Mr. Pitt, one young woman called out. We just want you to know we're on your side. What happened in there wasn't right." Brad stopped and looked at the small crowd. Their faces showed genuine concern and support. In a night full of ugliness, it was a welcome moment of kindness. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means a lot." As Brad got into his car, his phone was already buzzing nonstop. News of the confrontation had spread like wildfire across social media. Video clips of him standing up to Jimmy's bullying were going viral, with hashtags like "Yuck Respect Brad" and "Kimmel Gone Too Far" trending nationwide. Inside the studio, the producers were in full crisis mode, trying to figure out how to continue the show. Jimmy sat alone in his dressing room, scrolling through his phone and watching his reputation crumble in real time as the incident exploded online. A knock came at his door, and the network executive entered without waiting for a response. "Jimmy," he said gravely, "we need to talk about what happens next." Jimmy looked up, his usual confidence completely gone. The network executive, Sarah, closed the door behind her and took a seat across from him. "The network is getting flooded with calls," she said, her voice stern but controlled. "Social media is exploding. Kimmel canceled is trending #1 nationwide." Jimmy ran his hands through his hair. "It was just an interview that got a little heated. Everyone's overreacting." Sarah pulled out her tablet and turned it to face Jimmy. On the screen was a video clip from the show, already at 2 million views, despite being posted just 20 minutes ago. The comments section was filled with outrage. "This isn't a little heated, Jimmy," Sarah said. "This was an unprovoked attack on one of Hollywood's most respected actors. What were you thinking?" Jimmy slumped in his chair. "I don't know. Ratings have been down, and I thought stirring up some drama would help. Brad's been in the news with his family stuff, and I pushed too far." "Pushed too far? You humiliated him on national television." Sarah's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "The network is demanding you make a public apology. Tonight, before the show ends." Meanwhile, across town, Brad's phone wouldn't stop ringing. His publicist had arranged for him to be taken to a quiet hotel rather than his home to avoid the paparazzi that would inevitably be gathering. As he sat in the hotel suite, his manager put him on speakerphone with the studio executives behind his new F1 movie. "Brad, are you okay?" asked the film's producer, genuinely concerned. "I'm fine," Brad replied. "Just didn't expect my night to go that way." "We've been watching everything unfold online," the studio head said. "The public support for you is overwhelming. Jimmy Kimmel is getting destroyed in the court of public's opinion." Brad sighed. "That wasn't my intention. I just wanted to talk about our movie." "Well, ironically, everyone's talking about the movie now," his manager chimed in. "Ticket pre-sales have jumped 200% in the last hour. People are buying tickets as a way to show support for you." Back at the studio, Jimmy was preparing to go. Back on air. The atmosphere was tense, with staff members avoiding eye contact. The audience that remained was subdued, many still texting and sharing what they had witnessed. The director counted down, and the on-air sign lit up again. Jimmy looked directly into the camera, his usual joking demeanor completely absent. "Welcome back," he said, his voice serious. "Before we continue with tonight's show, I want to address what happened earlier during my interview with Brad Pitt." He paused, taking a deep breath. "My behavior was completely unprofessional and unacceptable. I crossed a line that should never be crossed. Not in comedy, not in entertainment, and certainly not when speaking to a guest on my show. To Brad Pitt, I offer my sincerest apology. There is no excuse for the way I spoke to you tonight." The audience was silent, watching intently as Jimmy continued. "To everyone watching at home and to the audience here tonight, I apologize to you as well. You tune in expecting entertainment, not disrespect and hostility. I failed you tonight, and I'm truly sorry." Across town, Brad was watching the apology live on the hotel TV. His publicist had texted to alert him that Jimmy would be making a statement. He listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. Jimmy continued on screen. "I've prided myself on running a show that brings joy and laughter, not hurt and humiliation. Tonight I fell far short of that standard. I can only promise to learn from this mistake and do better going forward." As Jimmy finished his apology, something unexpected happened. One person in the audience began to applaud, and slowly others joined in. It wasn't the enthusiastic cheering of earlier in the night, but rather an acknowledgement of someone owning their mistake. The next morning, the story was everywhere. News outlets, talk shows, and social media could speak of nothing else. Video. Clips of Brad standing up for himself with dignity, and Jimmy's subsequent apology played on constant loop. Outside his hotel, Brad found a small crowd of reporters waiting. Rather than avoid them, he decided to speak briefly. "About last night," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I appreciate Jimmy's apology. We all make mistakes, and what matters is how we respond to them. I'm ready to move forward and focus on the positive." When asked if he would ever return to Jimmy Kimmel Live, Brad smiled slightly. "Never say never, but maybe we'll both need a little time first." The story continued to evolve throughout the day. Entertainment analysts debated the long-term impact on Jimmy's career. Some predicted it would blow over, while others wondered if his reputation would ever fully recover. By evening, Jimmy had made the decision to take a short break from the show. He announced it in a simple statement. "I'll be stepping away from the show for a week to reflect on my actions and how I can be better when I return. I again offer my deepest apologies to Brad Pitt and to everyone who was affected by my behavior." 1 week later, Jimmy returned to his show with a noticeably different approach. Gone was the more aggressive style that had characterized recent episodes. In its place was something more reminiscent of his earlier years, funny but not at others' expense. As for Brad, the F1 movie premiered to record-breaking numbers. Critics praised his performance, but many noted that the film's success was partly due to the public's desire to show support for him after the Kimmel incident. 3 months after the infamous interview, Brad surprised everyone by accepting an invitation to return to Jimmy Kimmel Live. The anticipation was intense, with many wondering how the reunion would go. When Brad walked out on stage, the audience gave him a standing ovation. Jimmy greeted him with a handshake and a sincere smile. "Brad, thank you for coming back," Jimmy said once they were seated. "I know it couldn't have been an easy decision." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Brad replied simply. "And I actually do want to talk about my new movie this time." The audience laughed, and the tension that had built up over months finally broke. What followed was a genuine conversation about Brad's film, his passion for racing, and the creative process, all the things that should have been discussed that fateful night. As the interview concluded, Jimmy looked at Brad with genuine respect. "Thank you for showing me what true grace looks like. Not everyone would have come back after what happened." Brad nodded. "Sometimes the hardest moments teach us the most important lessons. I think we've both learned something from this experience." The incident changed both men in different ways. Jimmy became more thoughtful about his comedy, focusing on humor that didn't rely on tearing others down. Brad was reminded of the power of standing up for yourself with dignity, rather than lowering yourself to someone else's level. And the audience, both in the studio and at home, learned something too. They learned that how public figures handle conflict says more about their character than any polished interview ever could. Brad's calm strength in the face of provocation and Jimmy's willingness to sincerely apologize and change showed that even the worst moments can lead to growth and redemption. As Brad left the studio that night, having finally completed the interview that had been derailed months before, reporters asked if he had any final thoughts on the whole saga. "Sometimes things don't go as planned," he said with a small smile. "But it's not about what happens to you. It's about how you respond. I'm just glad we could end this story on a better note than where it began." With that, He got into his waiting car and drove away, leaving behind one of Hollywood's most talked about incidents, now with a conclusion that few could have predicted, but many could learn from.